So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the topic. I just want to welcome everyone to our call today. This training is on domestic violence and specifically in regard to it being a type of child maltreatment. And we wanted to dig into this topic this month because it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and so we're wanting just to kind of come alongside everyone in the community, really across the world, to bring attention to this issue. And what we wanted to kind of do today was dig into how it affects children in a home as well, the implications of that, going outside of just that the relationship between the two people, the two people involved in the violence, and how it just kind of like expands out within the home. So with that said, I'm going to pass things over to Kevin and let him jump into the content here. These lunch and learns are open with a small group like this for questions. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just ask it. We don't mind interruptions like that at all. It actually helps add to the conversation. So Kevin, it's all you now.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Ryan will be running slides for us today, and we'll make the slides available for you after today's lunch and learn. So I want to take you guys back about 20 years ago, and I was in the field. And I'm going out to a situation to where what is being reported to me, I have a fairly young mother, and it was described that she was bludgeoned in the face with a belt and a broom handle. And her face was terribly disfigured from that incident. And there was a child in the home. The child was, at the time, they were about 9, 10 years old. The child did not witness everything, but they were in the home. And this was the mother's boyfriend that was in the home with them. They had spent the night drinking, using marijuana. An argument had ensued to where he thought that she was cheating on him. Sound familiar, right, class? So I get to the home and the boyfriend is nowhere to be found. And the mother is very reluctant to come to the door. The child actually opens the door and takes me over to where the mother is on the couch. And the report did not give a true picture of what I saw in that moment. This mom, she was probably 20 something. And at the time I was fairly close in that age realm, right? And this child was taking care of his mother. The child was cooking breakfast for the mom. She could barely eat. The child was literally smashing eggs and trying to get her to eat the eggs. He had put milk in the bowl with the eggs just so the mom could eat. So that image really stuck with me, throughout my career. We got that mom out of that home with that child immediately that day, got them over to a shelter. And this is a case that was a terrible case to where the mom actually left our state to another state. And that mother changed their identity, changed the child's identity so that the perpetrator could never find them. And worked with law enforcement on that. This guy went to jail. He only served about 1.5 years before he got out on probation. So it's stories like this, and then over my career, I've probably worked somewhere hundreds, maybe thousands of these cases in my career, all the way to where I have these severe cases, and then you have some more of the traditional power and control cases, even to the incident. Some of it is just juvenile and ridiculous. Like, for comparison, there was a case where I went out and the father was actually defecating on the mother's car, so the mother would not leave the home. you see all kinds of things in the subject matter. And when you see the children that are involved with it, it just touches you at a different level completely. Because when I talked to this child in the first case that I was mentioning, this child was able to describe to me in great detail what was happening the afternoon at lunchtime before the drinking and the marijuana use ensued. The child was able to recollect all of the information that was going on. Where were they? Where was the mother? Where was the boyfriend? And I was able to reconstruct about 18 hours worth of life in that incident. And the child was so descriptive in the violent rendering. I was able to move fairly quickly through the assessment. Law enforcement was able to move fairly quickly in that assessment. The physical evidence alone was enough to compel protective services from both child protection and legal, right? But the child themselves, the impact of that, watching the child's face dart off, and as I'm interviewing them and they get that 1,000-yard stare, and then bringing them back into the moment, the present with me, so that I could collect the rest of the information to make a good call in the field that day. So these cases have left lots of pictures in my mind. The stories of the children that I've engaged with and interacted with have left stories in the mind that I can't forget. I remember smells, I remember sights, I remember there's some instances where I could almost taste things in the house. So there's that secondary, stress that we all get from the field, as well as we hear stories and interact with people in our community. And so that is really the rationale. I wanted to share the rationale. Ryan will share the slide deck rationale for you, but that's the story behind why this is such an important topic for us in child protective services. Because these children, I can tell you in my clinical world, I actually used to do counseling for soldiers that were coming back from Iraq. A lot of the effective observations and how the countenance in which they retold their stories, these children exhibit the exact same manifestations. They have the same body language, they have the same tone of voice, they have the same 1,000-yard stare that these soldiers would share as they watch their friends, their brothers, their sisters being killed in battle. And so that's why we've named this is Kids Growing Up in a Battlefield, because there's some similarities here. So as we talk about domestic violence and intimate partner violence, it's really important to remember, number one, in the world of child welfare, it's one of the top 3 reasons Child Protective Services gets called out to a home: domestic violence, substance use disorder, and severe and pervasive mental illness. All these things kind of coalesce and manifest themselves in the family's lives, and renders a child potentially in danger, in great danger, or harm has come to the child, whether it's physical harm, emotional harm, what have you. So we know that more than 20 years of research, children exposed to domestic violence and intimate partner violence, and domestic discord, that they suffer trauma, social challenges. They're at a higher risk of drug and alcohol use and poor school performance. So we should commit time towards professional development and working on how we engage and how we protect victims that are experiencing DV and IPV. So inside of that, I wanted to share some statistics with you. Statistics help inform our decision making. When we're interfacing, when we're providing services to victims in these scenarios, relevant statistics help us to put a social work meter in place, right? It helps us to gauge not just the story that we're hearing, the experience from the victim's perspective or the perpetrator's perspective, but it also gives us some type of leveling system to know, okay, we need to take this a little bit more serious. For instance, some of you probably know 30 to 60% of families identified child maltreatment and DV and IPV together. So 30 to 60% of all the families that you interface with, if child maltreatment has happened or been alleged, then there is a high statistic, a high probability that domestic violence and intimate partner violence is with it. DV and IPV parents and caretakers, those that are violent in the home, there's an increased potential for physical violence towards the children. And it could be, we see that it could be something that is premeditated violence toward the child or something accidental that happens to the child. So it's either an active or a passive violent reaction towards the children. Negative emotional and psychological impacts. 40% and greater of all the CPS cases examined in the US resulted in a severe physical harm or death of a child. So if domestic violence is one of the top 3 reasons that children come into protective service arenas, then 40% or more of those. So that tells you something to be paying attention to, right? That your social work senses should be triggered at this moment. 40% of those result in physical harm or death of a child. We also know from research, and this isn't in your slide, this is from my fatality research, is that ages 0 to 3, so of these 40+% cases of DV, the children that actually are categorized in the fatality due to maltreatment, the age range is 0 to 3, highest probability of fatality. So the age matters. If you have a victim child and a partner coming in 0 to 3, then we want you to pay more attention in those cases, be more inquisitive in those cases. So we know 1 in 4 women are victims, and we know that 1 in 10 men are victims. And when we look at the LGBTQ population, we know that 44% of lesbian women and 40% of gay men are victims. So same-sex couples that either come to have children from previous relationships or adoption or however they are the legal parents of children, we understand through the research that 44% and 40% are victims of DV/IPV. Transgendered partners have a higher probability of being victimized in public. So that's something to pay attention to. So if you're working in the LGBTQ communities, they are at higher risk of intimate partner violence or domestic violence. And so we need to keep that in the forefront of our minds so that, again, that we're serving them well, we're listening to their stories very carefully. Because we may come from communities that are not as astute to the challenges that these members of our community are engaging and meeting and experiencing. The other scary statistic is that less than 5% of the LGBTQA community seeks a protective order. And quite honestly, what I read in some of the research is because they're not believed. Because of where they come from, because of their sexual orientation, and who they are, that there's still a stigma in our community not to believe members of our community when they come to us seeking help. So sharing some of those statistics, Ryan, go ahead and go to the next slide. I think I have some more statistics for you. No, we're going to go right into victim-child impact areas. Okay. So inside of those statistics of how, DV/IPV does not discriminate. I believe we can all agree to that looking at the research. And so when we look at victim and child impact areas, this is how it impacts the children. So we're going to see Children and victims witnessing domestic violence can have long-term and varied effects, okay? So something that you witness today can have long-lasting effects. I share with you my experiences in the field to prove that point. You know, I wasn't there physically in the room when the violence happened, but my engagement in the case obviously was impressionable enough for that to stay with me. So if that's something that I remember, how much more is that magnified in the life of the victim? Children may not sleep through domestic violence. There are certain things and cues that children hear, right? They live in these homes, and if DV or IPV is a pattern, then there are certain things that their bodies, their minds, their hearts, their little souls begin to attune with that warn them that it's about to happen again. And so they may not sleep well. So one of the things that you want to engage children victims is asking them about their sleep. What are their sleeping habits and patterns? They may hear angry voices from their parent or their loved one for cries for help. They may see damaged property, holes punched in walls, countertops being tore up, furniture being broken, vehicles being smashed, windshields being smashed, any of that, any property damage that is a result from violent and angry outbursts. The children know. The children know. Yesterday, this huge hole was not in the wall. Today it is. And that seems to be a regular occurrence in my house. Children may be sworn to silence and asked to lie for their abusers when police arrive or when child protection arrives. So they may not be as ready to talk in that moment. Go ahead, Ryan, to the next section. Law enforcement states they often find that children hiding under the bed or in the closet or more dangerously between the adults when trying to stop the attack, right? How many of you have heard stories where the victim partner or the child themselves are telling you about hiding under the bed or in the closet in another room? Sometimes maybe even they leave the house to get away from the violence, or that they have tried to intervene and get in between their parents at that moment and try to push them away from each other. Those moments are very scary because children are often hurt during those moments. Can impact the child's daily functioning. We talked about sleep, but another area that we want to talk to kids about is what is their daily routine? When we're interviewing children to understand the impact that DV or IPV may have had on them, asking them about what does their usual day look like for you? Start from in the morning when you wake up and walk them through, have them recreate a usual day. And then talk to them about a few days in a row or a week. Because you're looking at, you know, their eating habits, their sleeping habits, where are they at in the house? You know, are there times of days that make them worry more than others? How do mom and dad or mom and mom, how are they interacting with each other on a day-to-day basis? And what are some elicitation that we can find from the children as we talk to them about that? Other impacts, children are also at a higher risk of truancy and school dropout, emotional distress, guilt, health problems, and delinquency. So here we find children that are trying to escape and get away from things. They also are at that high probability of learning how to be, how to engage in power and control. I'll get it out. I'll get it out. How to engage in power and control, and they control their relationships as they have learned in that house. And so that could result in bullying, right? Children that come from DV or IPV homes could be bullying other kids. or other areas of control. I know that working with teenagers that promiscuity and sexual control, having multiple sexual partners, or things of that nature. So you may have sexual variation in behavior in a child that comes from a DV or IPV home. Significant long-term effects such as PTSD, drug and alcohol abuse. We know from the research that children often are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. This is a very traumatic experience for them. It's life and death. It's life and death. They don't know if their loved one is going to be severely harmed or killed. Drug use and alcohol abuse stems from trying to find a coping mechanism to deal with the hurt and the trauma, right? So they're actually statistically, I believe the last study I read in 2019, it'll be provided to you in a link here before the end of the session, that it's more than 60 to 65% of children that come out of a DV IPV home experiment or become addicted to a substance. They're 6 times higher risk for suicide and a higher risk of intergenerational abuse. Again, that's that they learned how to behave this way. They've structured their belief system around power and control. And so their relationships follow suit from what they've learned in the home, right? And they're at 6 times a higher risk for suicidality. So when you're talking to children victims through your service provisions, that you want to keep these things in mind. And there's a strong link between children witnessing domestic violence and engaging in criminal activity as adults, believe it or not. How's that sit with everybody? Is there anything new that stood out to you? Or anything just stood out to you?
I'll say for me, it's overwhelming. I've already reviewed this material, but hearing you share it like that, it's just a lot to take in, you know?
Thank you, Ryan. I thought I saw another student pop up. You just didn't unmute. So if you want to unmute and pop up again, that'd be great. Or maybe you just made a mistake on the keyboard. I don't know.
Yeah, so Kevin was asking, is any of these impact areas something that you hadn't really considered at some point, where maybe it just kind of seems like a newer thing to consider?
All right, well, feel free to interrupt me and jump in if you have a comment or a question, okay? Don't feel like you just have to sit there and listen to me sit here and talk to you all day.
Right. Hey, Kevin, I had another question. You referenced a link that was going to give them access to some of the studies that you were referencing from 2019.
Yes.
Have you seen any studies more recently than that, where like we're seeing sort of a relationship of the pandemic or being in a quarantine kind of situation, and
yeah, right. Thank
how
you
that
for
relates
asking.
to that?
Yeah. So there's some recent research that is starting to emerge now because of the COVID pandemic. 2 of them, 1, 2, 3, there are 4 studies that were recently released between March and August of 2021 that did some great investigation and exploration of domestic violence has actually increased during the pandemic. And we understand some of why from our perspective, right? Because folks are at home more often, they're together more often. And so work or school or these other areas that we leave the home for that natural distancing in life, you know, all of that is compacted. And so, and then all of the other frustrating points about living in the pandemic, the economic stressors, not going to school, you know, normal life is compressed and restricted to the point to where people are frustrated, people are angry. And what do we do more often when we're frustrated and angry is that we take it out on the ones that we love. People that do not have good coping skills to do that in a way that is not manifesting in danger or violence. So we've seen an increase in DV-IPB cases, and more specifically tied to child maltreatment.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll try to share as many of those links as we can, if anyone's interested in those things towards the end here. I'll jump back to the slides, Kevin.
Thanks, Ryan.
Ready for me to do that?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's talk more specifically about some of you will interact and interface with Child Protective Services. So I want to create two categories for us here. In my study of all the jurisdictions in the United States, here's where I see the two lines. I'm just going to just kind of sit here with you. I go to the whiteboard, but I don't have my screen pulled right up to the whiteboard. And so many jurisdictions include a child that is physically present during a domestic violent scenario. So if the child is physically present and they witness a partner being violent towards the other partner, then that would be accepted for a child protective investigation or assessment. Okay. Most of the jurisdictions in the United States carry that because that's tied directly back to the Child Abuse and Prevention Treatment Act, CAPTA, our federal law. There's actually a designation there. Now, most states in the US also include if a child is what we call in earshot. They may not physically with their eyes see, but they're in their bedroom and they hear everything, because that also has an impact on the child. Remember, we just went through the impacts that I culled out of the studies for the last 20 years. And part of the impact is children that are exposed auditorily to violence, because they can tell you what was said. They can tell you tones of voice. They can hear screams, pleas for help, cries to stop. They can hear things smashed. They can hear loud thuds. So this has an impact. In the state of North Carolina, where we're from, we include both. So for when you make a child protective report in my state, we recognize both the child is physically present and witnesses the violence, but we also recognize that child maltreatment is if the child is in earshot to the violence, because that also has an impact to the child. So I want to set those two categories up as you're thinking through, because we have one of our students all the way up from Nova Scotia, which is a completely different jurisdiction altogether, and fascinating. So
we have the 5 intervention strategies, just some suggestions that you had pulled together.
So when we're engaging with victims of domestic violence, we really want to have some idea of strategies in our mind. Best strategy that I can put out there, and that's why it's number 1, is know your local DV-IVP shelter and the services that we provide. One of our students works in this arena, and every community that I'm in, it is one of the first relationships that I build. Why? Because DV and IPV is one of the top 3 reasons Child Protective Services gets involved with a family. So I need to build strong partnerships with them, understand their services, and that I'm helping victims get to the right place at the right time. Child protection is first. Leaving a violent partner is a process, and we know that. This is the rub, that when we have Child Protective Services, sometimes a child has to come out of the home for a period of time while we're trying to mitigate the harm and danger concerns in that home. And we also have to be sensitive and careful around victims that are leaving violent partners, because we know statistically it can take up to 7 times for them to actually leave. There oftentimes we may fall into the arena of, they just need to leave. I don't understand why you keep putting your life on the line. Well, it's not really for us to judge that at the moment. We need to extend patience and grace to victims, and hopefully that our empathic connection with them encourages them to leave safely. But first and foremost, child protection is there for the safety of the child. So while we want to make a safe plan for the victim and the child to leave the violent partner, sometimes the child has to come out of the environment so that we can secure the safety of the child. Sequencing. If you're interviewing a family from child protective or law enforcement, or if you're engaged with any types of court services, the sequence of interview is really important. Sequencing that interview in a manner that guards the safety of the victim and the partner child, okay? So that way you want to make sure that you're interviewing away from the perpetrator. Give them the space to do it. Maybe it's better for them to meet you at a mutual home base location. Bringing them to the office, weigh that out carefully, because what we're trying to do is protect the victims from any more backlash of violence from the perpetrator, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Fourth, don't victimize the victim. A lot of times we try to make the victim into the perpetrator because they won't leave. We believe that they're not seeing it from the position that we need them to see it from. Or they're protecting the perpetrator, right? As frustrating as that can be sometimes for those of us in helping positions or rendering a protective service, we have to remember they're doing this from self-preservation, right? Victims of DV and IPV, if they're defending a perpetrator, more than likely we need to give them the grace and come at it from the perspective that this is about them protecting themselves, and this is the only way they know how to do it right now. So they may actually cover for the perpetrator, because their whole belief system, their romantic, intimate relationship is built around that structure with that perpetrator. And so getting those two things separated, you have the choice. My team hears me say this often, is that you have the choice. You either wield the knife of a thief and you break it and you cut it up, or you're a surgeon where you're strategic, you're careful, and you're intentional about how you're trying to help separate those two to protect the victims. Are you in need of some helpful interviewing cues? Question mark. Here at the Real Academy, what we want to share with you, some of our resources. I have a couple of books here that I want to share with you. Well, I think Ryan put the links in the chat.
Yeah, I can stop sharing. So if you want to show the covers real quick.
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan. And do we have anything else in the chat at this point?
Well, we had a couple of responses come through about the different states. One was ear and witness, and then in New Jersey it says just witness. Louisiana is only in the presence of. So those are some interesting, just ways of approaching DV in this kind of situation, or IPV.
That's true. And in some jurisdictions, if it says in the presence of, really defining what that means can be super helpful. So some resources that we want to share with you. We have a page on our website at realacademy.pro. Is it on the pro site or the co site, Ron?
That's right. It's the pro site. We have an insights page. Yeah, we have an insights page, and that's been a really popular article because, Kevin, you share a little bit more of your field experience encountering these types of cases, and there's some really practical things in there that's related to the cues, like when you're in that interviewing stage with the victim, the children, things that are good to ask to be able to really dig in and understand what's going on there. So we hope you all will check out that article on our insights page.
And all the research that we've provided to you today in this Lunch and Learn, all the links to that research are in that Insight article.
That's true. Yeah. There was one especially related to the data slide that we showed earlier, all the statistics there, and where you pulled that information from. That may be helpful. There's more in those resources too. Obviously, we have to be selective in what we put into our content, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so the two books that I wanted to share with you that have helped me along my journey. Number one, this book right here. This is by Kleiman and Pollock. Kleiman and Pollock do a lot of writing in regards or from the perspective of court, whether it's child protective or family court in general. And this is Domestic Abuse, Child Custody, and Visitation right here. And
back it out just a little bit so we can see the whole thing.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we
All
go.
right.
All right. And so this is a fantastic book that gives us a view into what happens in family court for families that are experiencing domestic violence. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're engaged with services, this kind of helps you understand the processes and the stories as families traverse that process. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's the first link in the chat.
Yes. And then in regards to just social work practice or practicing in this field, if you're licensed or not, if you're engaging in this subject matter with families, there's a larger book out there by Tina Mashi and George Leibowitz that I have used quite a bit, and it's Forensic Social Work. They have designated multiple sections in their book that talks about practical skills that you're using with families. Also talks more specifically about child welfare processes from a general perspective, and also talks about more of the impacts and effects of domestic violence to help you be very aware as you're engaging with victims in domestic violence and even perpetrators. Gives you some very practical skills and knowledge around working with perpetrators of IPV and DV.
Yeah, Kevin, going along with that, just kind of offering more resources. I have something I wanted to share with the students today too, and invite them to. Next week, we're doing a workshop on DV and IPV. We like to pair up our lunch and learns with workshops because it takes us from this place of just kind of information. We're sharing statistics, we're sharing rationale, some intervention strategies, things like that. But it's so much different when you actually begin to look at a simulated case with a team of people and read all the information that's there, all the statements and everything else that's reported, and to begin to talk through that together using some of the decision-making tools that we've developed. And so next week, we're going to be doing that in our child maltreatment case workshop on domestic violence. That is on the 28th. It's on, you can get to it through Eventbrite, the QR code right here. If you scan it off your screen, it'll take you directly to that page. And we're offering our students today the 21% discount, the Real 21 code. So if that's something that's interesting to you and you want to join us, it's a very interactive experience where we have a small group of students and we actually work the case together. And Kevin, we're looking at 2 simulated cases for that time period, right? It's a 2-hour workshop.
Yeah, we're gonna try to get to 2. I've
Okay.
got 2 planned out, but we'll see how class goes.
Yeah, right. Because I know all of our caseworkers are like, okay, yeah, who works the case in 1 hour, right?
Not me.
Yeah, so obviously we're going to use the time as best we can to really dig into that as much as possible. We're not going to be able to take it from report to court, but we will hopefully be able to cover a lot of material there to help us just kind of see how this plays out, and maybe learn a little bit from each other, especially if we have students from different states. And Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're going to be doing that on site at a DSS agency in our state with some of their active CPS workers. Isn't that correct?
That's right. So you're going to get to go behind the scenes and really see how Child Protective works.
Yeah. So this will be a little bit of a hybrid. We'll have people on coming in through Eventbrite, and then we're also going to have live students right there with us in the room. So I'm looking forward to that. It makes it a little bit more interactive. So hopefully you all will join us for that. Next month, we're focused on this concept of moral turpitude, which is really just, I try to describe it as kids being forced or obligated into crime within their household. And we're going to be doing a case workshop on that, tied together with that lunch and learn as well. So anyway, there's some information for you all and how you can continue to join with us, learn with us in lunch and learns, and then do some practical application in the workshops. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Kevin, did you want to cover anything else before we open up for questions?
No, I just want to say thank you to everybody that joined us for lunch today. And thank you for allowing us to share our passion from Real Academy with you. I want to open it up for discussion. And before you leave, if you wouldn't mind dropping the chat box, just a thought about, what did you think about today? Or what are you leaving here that impressed you? Tell us something we can do better, because this is all about you. Our learning community. We want to make it practical, relevant, and responsive to what your needs are.